They say attention is love in action. Maya Collins learned that lesson from her father, a police detective who believed the smallest details could save a life. He used to tell her, "Observation isn't about suspicion, sweetheart. It's about care." And long after he was gone, she kept living by those words, quietly watching, caring. When the world rushes, she slows down. When voices rise, she listens. When others panic, she breathes. The afternoon began like any other, golden light spilling through the windows, rain tracing silver lines down the glass, the soft hum of jazz filling the air. Maya moved like memory, folding napkins with gentle precision, checking each glass until it gleamed. Every detail mattered. Every motion had meaning. On days like this, she could almost hear her father beside her, his badge catching the light, his voice steady as ever. The brain sees more when the heart stops racing, Maya. You'll understand one day. She didn't know that day had already come. That before the sun would set, those same lessons would be the difference between chaos and calm, between panic and peace. And it would all begin with one little girl, and one ordinary afternoon that changed everything. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The Ivory Room wasn't just another restaurant. To most people, it was the kind of place you walked into when you wanted to feel important. The chandeliers sparkled like they were competing with the city lights outside. Every chair was lined with velvet, every menu heavy enough to feel like a secret. The waiters moved in quiet rhythm, polite smiles, perfect posture, a ballet of service rehearsed 100 times over. And somewhere in the middle of that polished routine stood Maya Collins. Calm, present. She wasn't the fastest, or the loudest, or the one with the most compliments from the manager. But she noticed things. A crooked glass. A customer is fidgeting because of the cold draft from the vent. The small, tired sighs people let out when they thought no one was listening. That was her gift. The kind that doesn't sparkle under chandeliers, but keeps the world from falling apart. That afternoon, her shift began the same way every other shift had. She checked the tables near the window, the ones she secretly called the gold seats. Because around 3 p.m., when the sun broke through the glass, the whole place glowed like a painting. She loved that moment. It reminded her of Sundays with her dad, when he'd turn off the TV and say, "Look, sweetheart. See how light moves? It tells you where to focus." And then the doors opened. A man walked in, tall, polished, distracted. You could tell right away he was used to being noticed but hadn't been truly seen in a long time. Ethan Ward, billionaire, tech genius, single father, the kind of man people whispered about when he entered a room, because no one ever saw him without a phone in his hand or a plan in his head. But beside him was someone who didn't care about any of that, a little girl in a yellow raincoat, holding a stuffed bear that had seen better days. Sophie Ward, 6 years old, all innocence, all light. She held her father's hand, but even that seemed temporary, like two worlds touching just long enough before drifting apart again. Maya greeted them with her usual gentle smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Ivory Room." Ethan nodded without looking up. His voice clipped, precise. "Table by the window, please." Sophie tugged on his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, can we sit near the rain?" He didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but habit. His mind was already somewhere else. Maya noticed the hesitation, that small ache between father and daughter. She led them to a quiet corner, the window fogged slightly from the soft drizzle outside. She placed the menus down and said, gently, "That's my favorite spot too, sweetheart. The rain sounds better from here." "Sophie." He smiled, small and shy. She pulled out a crayon and began to draw circles on the napkin. Ethan scrolled through his emails, the glow of his phone reflecting off the silver cutlery. Maya watched them for a moment, the man of numbers and the child of color. One chasing the future, the other clinging to a memory. When Maya returned with water, she bent slightly and whispered, "That's a beautiful drawing. Who's it for?" Sophie looked up, eyes as clear as the rain outside. "It's for my mom. She's in heaven. I draw her so she doesn't fade." Maya froze just a second, then smiled softly. "My dad used to say memories never fade, they just get quieter." For the first time, Ethan looked up from his phone. Just a glance, long enough to see something in Maya's expression, something calm, familiar, unspoken. It unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. And then, almost as quickly as it came, the moment passed. His phone buzzed again, and his world shrank back into numbers and messages. But Maya kept watching, not in judgment, not in pity, just in quiet understanding, because she had seen that distance before. In her father's eyes, the year her mother died. The way love sometimes forgets how to show itself when grief gets in the way. She sighed, straightened her apron, and stepped away to tend to another table. In the background, Sophie kept drawing. The napkin was filled with hearts, rain clouds, and a small cat. Maya smiled to herself, unaware that those same drawings would soon lead her through chaos. And back to the meaning of her father's final lesson. It happened the way storms do, quietly at first. The dining room glowed under golden light. Forks chimed. Laughter drifted, and for a heartbeat, the world felt ordinary. No one noticed the tiny pulse of change that slipped through the air. Maya balanced a tray of glasses, weaving between tables with the kind of grace that came from repetition. Her eyes traced patterns the way her father once traced tire marks, seeing order where others saw motion. Across the room, Sophie had finished her drawing. The paper was filled with crayon hearts and a crooked little cat. She glanced up, proud, but her father's attention was buried behind the blue glow of his phone. She sighed, small shoulders rising, and turned toward the window where the rain still whispered against the glass. A delivery man entered, cold air curling around his jacket. Sophie's napkin fluttered, tumbling to the floor. She slid from her chair to catch it. No one saw her go. The moment was so delicate it barely made a sound, just the soft scrape of a chair leg, the hush of tiny footsteps disappearing behind the linen-draped tables. Then the soundscape changed. A tray crashed near the bar. A waiter shouted, "Careful." Every head turned for a split second, and when eyes returned to the billionaire's table, the child's seat was empty. Silence rushed in like cold water. Ethan looked up, still half inside an email, half outside of reality. He blinked once, twice, as if the space in front of him were playing tricks. "Sophie." The word came out small, uncertain. He stood, scanning left, right. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. Conversations halted. A wine glass toppled. People stared. Maya felt the air tighten, the collective intake of breath before panic. She turned, following Ethan's voice. The father's tone sharpened. "Sophie, where is she?" Manager Tracy was first to respond, heels clicking like warnings. She forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "Sir, please, we'll handle this quietly." But fear doesn't care for silence. It echoes through walls. Chairs scraped, guests whispered, cell phones lifted to record. The music stopped mid-note. Rain pressed harder against the windows, as if the weather itself was listening. Maya set down her tray. In that chaos, she felt something familiar, an old memory rising like instinct. She closed her eyes for a breath, slowing her heartbeat until the world stretched wider. Then she opened them, scanning details, the crayon still on the table, the napkin missing, a trail of crumbs leading toward the kitchen doors. A story written in fragments. Around her, Waiters bumped shoulders, calling Sophie's name into corners that held only echo. Tracy barked orders that dissolved into noise. Ethan's panic built into pleading. "Someone find my daughter." Maya moved through the confusion with almost surgical calm. She knelt to pick up Sophie's fallen chair, fingertips brushing a small smear of pink crayon on the floor. Her eyes followed it like a compass. The scent of citrus cleaner mixed with rain. The hallway light flickered once. There, she thought. A direction. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She simply began to walk, steady, eyes soft but focused, toward the service corridor at the back of the restaurant. Because where everyone else saw chaos, Maya saw patterns. And in that moment, her father's lesson wasn't just a memory, it was a map. And somewhere at the end of that map was a missing little girl, and the beginning of everything that was about to change. For a moment, everything inside the ivory room moved too fast to matter. Voices layered over one another, footsteps scattering like frightened birds. But in the middle of that noise, Maya Collins went still. Her hands trembled for a heartbeat, then stopped. She placed them flat against the edge of a table, grounding herself the way her father had taught her when she was a child, afraid of storms. "Feel something steady," he used to whisper, "and the rest will steady itself." She inhaled through her nose, counted to 3, and exhaled through her mouth. The clamor dulled, as if someone had turned the world's volume knob down just for her. She could hear smaller sounds now. The whisper of rain against glass, the distant hiss of the espresso machine, the faint hum of refrigeration from the kitchen. It was in that silence she began to see again. To everyone else, the restaurant was chaos. To Maya, it was a puzzle begging to be solved. Her eyes swept the floor. A silver streak of water near the table. A crayon snapped in half. Sophie's bear missing. The napkin she'd been drawing on was gone too. Maya crouched, running her finger along the carpet fibers until she spotted the tiniest dot of pink wax near the leg of a chair. "Crayon shavings," she murmured, still warm from pressure. It meant the child had dropped them moments ago. She rose slowly, scanning angles the way her father once did in crime scene photos pinned across their living room wall. Direction mattered. People always leave trails. Maya started rebuilding that story piece by piece. She noticed the way one chair near the aisle was slightly skewed inward, as though a small body had brushed past. The napkin dispenser on the next table leaned at an odd angle. Someone small had steadied themselves there. Tiny, wet footprints curved toward the kitchen door. She followed them. The lighting changed from golden to sterile white as she crossed into the service corridor. She could feel the hum of refrigerators vibrating through the floor. The smell of detergent and cooking oil filled the air. Somewhere behind her, Tracy barked orders into the noise. "No one leaves this building." It was fear disguised as authority. Maya didn't answer. She just kept walking. The hallway forked. One path led to storage, the other toward delivery. She hesitated for half a second, then remembered something her father once told her while showing her how to track a missing person. Fear moves toward open space. Safety moves toward sound. The storage hall was silent, closed. The delivery corridor pulsed faintly with the rhythmic slam of rain against the exit door. Children chase noise. They moved toward rhythm, toward curiosity. She turned right. Maya stepped closer to the door. The rain outside echoed like a metronome on tin. She noticed a faint scuff mark, rubber sole dragging toward the alley. She whispered to herself, "Kids don't run straight when they're scared, they zigzag." But an adult pulling them leaves parallel marks. Daniel tilted his head. "You have experience with this kind of thing." "My father was law enforcement," she said simply. "He taught me that paying attention is the only real form of protection." Then, softer. "And right now, that little girl needs someone to pay attention." She pushed the door open. Cold air spilled in, sharp, wet, alive. Outside, thunder murmured. The parking lights shimmered across puddles like scattered stars. Maya stood there for a moment, feeling the wind brush against her face, letting the rain gather on her arms until her heartbeat matched its rhythm. Behind her, Daniel muttered into his radio, organizing his team. Ahead of her, somewhere beyond the line of cars, a child's small sob flickered in and out of the storm. And in that moment, Maya understood what her father meant when he said, "The world always gives you clues. It just whispers them." She straightened, tightened her apron, and took her first step into the rain. Because this wasn't chaos anymore. It was a trail, and she had spent her whole life preparing to follow it. The back corridors of the ivory room didn't feel like the same world as the dining floor. Out there was laughter, chandeliers, and the polite hum of money. Back here, it was all concrete and hums, the forgotten pulse of a place that served but was never seen. Maya's shoes slipped slightly on the wet tile. The air smelled of bleach and rain seeping through the cracks near the loading bay. The sound of the storm outside beat like a low drum, steady and patient. She paused at the doorway. Her reflection ghosted across the glass of the swinging kitchen doors. Behind her, the restaurant staff moved like frightened shadows. But ahead, down that narrow hall where the lights flickered in uneven rhythm, there was something different. Stillness. She remembered her father's voice again. Stillness means decision. Whoever's moving stops to think, and that's where you'll find them. So she followed the stillness. Each step sounded louder than the last. The rain outside felt like a heartbeat, syncing with her own. A service cart stood halfway down the hall. One wheel turned sideways as though it had been bumped in a hurry. A napkin was caught beneath it, white, with a faint pink scribble of crayon near the corner. Maya knelt, touching the paper carefully, the way her father once handled evidence, not to claim it, but to understand it. The crayon line was broken midway, jagged, uneven. It wasn't a drawing anymore, it was a message. She whispered under her breath, "You were here, weren't you, sweetheart?" Behind her, Daniel Hayes arrived, his radio buzzing softly against the tension. He spoke into it, but Maya barely heard him. Her focus narrowed into a tunnel, the way she used to watch her father do when he followed a hunch. There were tiny details only someone trained in patience could see. The faint outline of small sneakers pressed into a thin layer of dust, the scuff of an adult shoe beside them, larger, heavier. 2 sets of prints. One follows the other. She turned her head slowly. The direction of the shoe marks changed near the supply closet, toward a back exit most guests never knew existed. The light above the door flickered. The exit sign's red glow painted the wall like a wound. Maya's hand brushed the doorknob. It was damp, not from the storm, but from a child's small, sweaty pee. She looked up at Daniel. She came this way. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'll check the alley." Ethan tried to follow, but security blocked him at the dining room doors, insisting he stay put. He moved ahead, but Maya lingered. Something about the hallway didn't feel right. Her eyes traced upward toward a small black dome in the corner, a security camera. The red indicator light was off. She whispered someone killed the feed. Daniel's voice came back from down the hall. "You sure?" Maya stepped onto a stool, reaching up. The wire hung loose, cut clean. Not torn, not unplugged, but sliced. Whoever had taken Sophie had done it quickly and quietly. Her stomach knotted. "This isn't a lost child anymore," she murmured. "It's deliberate." Daniel's radio crackled. "Security confirms all exits sealed except the delivery bay." "Copy that." Maya spoke, half to herself, half to her father's ghost. "If she's scared, she'll hide. If she's taken, she'll leave clues." The rain intensified outside, hammering against the walls like a warning. The corridor opened into the storage wing, rows of crates, linen bags, stacked boxes of wine. Light pooled in broken patches along the floor. Somewhere a pipe dripped steadily, each drop echoing into the silence. She crouched low, scanning. A small reflection caught her eye, a charm bracelet glinting beneath a crate. Maya reached for it. Tiny silver letters spelled out one word: Sophie. She held it tightly, whispering, "You're close." Her mind replayed every word Sophie had said earlier that afternoon. "I draw her so she doesn't fade." The child's world revolved around holding on to memories. So if she'd been separated or frightened, she'd cling to the one thing that reminded her of home. The stuffed bear, Button. Maya turned slowly, eyes sweeping the floor. Maya stood, her wet apron clinging to her legs. She turned toward the exit. "She's outside." Daniel joined her, scanning the door. "It's locked from the inside. There's no way they—" "Emergency latch," she interrupted. "It clicks if you don't slam it shut." She pushed the bar gently. It gave way with a soft click. Wind burst in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and city smoke. Outside, rain blurred the world into silver streaks. The alley stretched long and narrow, lined with dumpsters and parked cars. Neon reflections rippled across puddles. She could be anywhere. "Then we start listening," Maya said quietly. They stepped out. The rain fell harder, saturating every sound until silence became impossible. It was in that chaos that Maya found direction. A faint hiccup of sound breaking through the rain's rhythm. A child's sob. Rain has a way of softening everything. The edges of buildings, the weight of noise, even the sound of fear. But in that narrow alley behind the ivory room, it didn't soften the tension. It only amplified it. Every drop felt like a ticking clock counting down to the truth. Maya stood just 10 yards away from the man crouched beside the black sedan. He looked ordinary, painfully ordinary. The kind of face you pass 100 times in a day and never remember. Maybe that's what made him dangerous. Sophie was inches from the open door, tiny frame shivering in her rain-spotted coat. Her stuffed bear, Button, hung from the man's pocket like a captured flag. The car engine hummed, running ready. Maya didn't move quickly. She didn't shout or demand. She knew people in panic respond to tone before words, and the man's tone was still in control. So she began with calm. "Hey there," she said gently, the rain carrying her voice just far enough. "Looks like a long afternoon for both of us." "Huh?" The man turned his head a little, smiling the way salesmen do when they sense an audience. His hand stayed on the door handle. "She wandered out," he said. "I was bringing her back inside." Sophie's eyes darted between them, trying to decide which world to believe. Maya gave her a small smile, the same soft one from earlier. "Hey, artist," she said. "You still drawing in the rain?" The little girl blinked, recognition flickering. She took one small step forward. The man's smile faltered. His hand tightened on the door. "Sweetheart, your dad's waiting," he muttered. His voice lost its sweetness, cracking under impatience. Daniel Hayes stepped quietly from behind the row of cars, staying in shadow. His radio buzzed once and went silent. He had his weapon drawn, but low, steady, controlled. Maya could feel his presence behind her like a safety net, but she didn't rely on it. She relied on what her father had taught her. Empathy is disarming. She crouched slightly so she was at Sophie's eye level. "It's okay, honey," she whispered. "Remember what you told me? About drawing your mom so she doesn't fade? You can tell me all about it inside where it's warm." The child nodded, one tear cutting through the rain on her cheek. She moved again, 2 steps this time, until she was within reach. The man shifted, blocking her path. "Wait," he snapped, and the false politeness vanished. "She's scared. You're making it worse." Maya's tone stayed even. "She's scared because you're in the way." He blinked, anger twitching across his face. His right hand slid inside his coat. Don't. The word screamed in Maya's head, but her lips didn't move. Instead, she lifted her palm slightly, open, non-threatening. Let her go, she said quietly, almost kindly, and we'll forget you ever touched that door handle. For a long second, the rain seemed to hold its breath. Then Daniel's voice cut through it, hard and precise. Sir, step back. Hands where I can see them. The man froze. His hidden hand trembled, then slowly came out empty. He raised both arms halfway, the movement jerky, unnatural. Sophie ran, small shoes splashing, straight into Maya's arms. The contact broke the spell. Everything Maya had been holding inside collapsed into motion. Adrenaline, relief, rage, prayer. She held the girl so tightly she could feel her heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird against her chest. Daniel crossed the distance in seconds, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The stranger cursed, struggled once, then went still as cold metal clicked around his wrists. The sound of handcuffs always carried a strange kind of finality. The end of chaos, the beginning of consequence. Maya turned Sophie's face toward her shoulder, shielding her eyes from the scene. The girl's sobs came in short bursts, half fear, half exhaustion. Daniel's radio barked life again. Suspect secured. Child recovered. But words like secured and recovered felt too mechanical for what had just happened. Nothing about this was procedural. It was profoundly human. The man they called Ryan Cole, once an employee at Ward Technologies, fired months earlier for theft, muttered something about mistakes, about revenge, about how none of this was supposed to go this far. Maya barely listened. She only heard Sophie's small, hiccuped breaths and the distant sound of approaching sirens. When the police arrived, the alley lit up in alternating blue and red. Reporters hadn't caught wind yet, but the spectacle felt heavy enough to fill a front page. Officers took statements, flashed badges, and lifted the man into the cruiser. Maya watched silently as the door shut with a dull thud, muffling his voice into nothing. Daniel exhaled, rubbing rain from his eyes. You did good, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, I just did what I was taught. The rain finally began to thin. Drops slowed, stretching into single lines of silver sliding down her face. The clouds parted slightly, revealing the pale bruise of a sunset struggling to break through. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, the frantic pounding of shoes on wet pavement. Ethan Ward. His expensive suit clung to him, soaked through. His face, usually carved in calm precision, was unrecognizable, creased with fear, eyes searching. He stopped when he saw them, the waitress kneeling in the rain, the child in her arms. The sight gutted him. All the money in the world, and it was a stranger holding what he valued most. He dropped to his knees beside them without caring about the mud. His voice cracked on the first word. Sophie. The little girl turned, saw him, and everything inside her broke open. She threw herself into his arms, crying so hard her small body shook. Ethan held her like someone learning how to hold for the first time. Clumsy, desperate, sacred. Maya stood back, giving them space. She watched the reunion the way her father used to watch sunrises, quietly, reverently. Ethan looked up through tears. You found her. Maya shook her head slightly. She found me. I just remembered what my dad taught me. He tried to speak again, but words failed. Gratitude this large doesn't fit easily through language. Around them, the police finished their work. Report forms passed hands, radios clicked off, and the alley emptied until only 3 people remained. The billionaire, his daughter, and the waitress who had seen what no one else saw. The rain eased into drizzle. The air smelled of wet concrete in beginnings. Ethan's driver arrived with an umbrella, but he waved him away. He stayed kneeling in the rain, his hand resting on Sophie's back, eyes fixed on Maya. "How did you know where to look?" he asked finally. She hesitated. Then, softly, "My father was a detective. He used to say fear leaves footprints if you're willing to look close enough." Ethan nodded slowly, as if cataloging every word. "He'd be proud," he said. Maya smiled, small and sad. "I hope so." The ambulance lights painted the walls red one last time, then faded into the distance. The city exhaled. When they finally walked back toward the restaurant, the world looked different. The same chandeliers still glowed behind the glass, but now their light felt softer, humbler. Staff peeked out as the trio passed, whispers rising, cameras lowered out of respect. Tracy Miller, the manager who had barked orders earlier, stood frozen by the door. For once, she had nothing to say. Maya met her gaze only briefly. No triumph, no anger, just quiet civility, and kept walking. Inside, Ethan sat Sophie down near the fire to warm her hands. Steam lifted from her raincoat. He wrapped her in a dry towel one of the cooks had fetched, then turned back to Maya. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," she replied. He looked at her. The sentence hit him like a confession, because she was right. He had spent years building things that demanded attention, and had forgotten to give it to the one person who needed it most. He knelt again, this time not from fear but respect. "If you ever need anything..." Maya interrupted gently. "Just promise me you'll take her to see the rain once in a while. Kids remember that kind of thing." He nodded, voice too thick for words. For a long time, none of them spoke. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fireplace and the fading rhythm of rain against the windows. Somewhere, a jazz pianist resumed playing, picking up the same melody that had filled the room before the chaos began. Only now it sounded slower, like an echo of survival. Outside, police cars rolled away one by one, their lights disappearing into the city's reflections. Inside, a father relearned the art of paying attention, and a waitress stood quietly nearby, feeling her father's badge heavy in her pocket, warmed by something that felt almost like peace. Every storm ends the same way, not with silence, but with soft apology. The kind of quiet that follows chaos, when the world finally exhales and everything fragile is allowed to exist again. That was the air inside the ivory room an hour after the alley lights dimmed. Rainwater trailed across the marble floor in tiny silver veins. Candles had been blown out, replaced by the faint glow of emergency lamps. The dining crowd had gone. The noise, the music, the arrogance, all of it had drained into memory. What remained were whispers, wet footprints, and one family trying to remember how to hold each other. Ethan Ward sat near the fireplace, his soaked jacket draped over a chair, his tie gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The billionaire no one ever saw disheveled looked human for the first time. His daughter, Sophie, sat wrapped in a blanket, eyes half closed, hair plastered to her forehead. She clutched the mended bear button in one hand, thumb brushing the new stitch Maya had sewn with the restaurant's spare thread. Maya knelt a few feet away, still in her damp uniform, steam rising faintly from the fabric. She was trying to make herself small, invisible, the way servers do when emotions outweigh etiquette. But Ethan wouldn't let her vanish. He kept glancing toward her, as if afraid she might disappear next. The fire popped. Outside, thunder rolled once and retreated beyond the skyline. In that quiet, gratitude began to take shape, not the loud, public kind that buys headlines, but the quiet, aching kind that rewires a soul. Ethan's voice broke the silence. It was soft, almost a whisper. "She hasn't let go of you since you carried her inside." Maya looked up, hesitant. "Kids hold on to safety," she said. "They can feel when it's real." The simplicity of her words hit harder than philosophy. He nodded slowly, watching the fire reflect in the glass of the picture frames on the wall. One frame had fallen during the panic, a photograph of the restaurant's grand opening years ago. He reached for it, wiped the soot from its edge, and stared at his younger self, smiling, certain married. A man who had believed time was a promise. I used to think success meant control, he murmured. Today proved me wrong. I couldn't control a single thing that mattered. Maya said nothing. She'd learned that silence often heals faster than advice. Sophie stirred and opened her eyes. Daddy. I'm here, sweetheart, he said. His voice cracked again. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Did the lady find Button? Maya smiled. We both did, didn't we? Sophie nodded sleepily. Button's brave. He is, Maya whispered. Just like you. The child smiled faintly, then drifted back to sleep against her father's shoulder. Ethan looked up at Maya, disbelief still shadowing his features. You were calm when everyone else was in chaos. How? She hesitated, then answered quietly. My father was a detective. He used to tell me fear isn't the enemy, distraction is. He died when I was 19, but I still hear him when things fall apart. Today was his voice again. Ethan listened as if her words were scripture. He felt a sting of envy, not for the father she had lost, but for the wisdom she'd kept. The clock above the bar ticked past midnight. Rain softened into drizzle. The city outside began to hum with post-storm life, distant traffic, wet tires hissing on asphalt. The manager, Tracy Miller, approached nervously. Her makeup had streaked. Her hands twisted the hem of her sleeve. Mr. Ward, I wanted to apologize. I should have acted sooner. He cut her off gently. The only one who acted right was her. He gestured toward Maya. Tracy's face colored. She muttered something about reports and left, heels clicking like retreat. Maya shifted uneasily. You don't have to defend me. I'm not, Ethan replied. I'm just acknowledging truth. Something I've been bad at lately. For a long time, they just watched the fire. Flames licked low, reflecting in their eyes like two different kinds of memory, his filled with regret, hers with ghosts. Finally, Ethan spoke again. Do you have family? My brother. College. I cover his tuition with this job. Your father would be proud. She smiled faintly. He'd probably say, don't work too hard for people who don't notice. Then tonight he's smiling for sure, Ethan said. The words hung between them, awkward and beautiful. Outside, police tape flapped in the wind around the alley. Journalists had started to gather beyond the main door, flashes of light cutting through the rain like restless ghosts. Daniel Hayes stood guard, intercepting questions with short, polite answers. Inside, the warmth grew denser, heavier, not oppressive, just intimate. Ethan looked down at his sleeping daughter, then back at Maya. She hasn't really had anyone since her mother died. Nannies came and went. They treated her like a schedule, not a soul. I kept thinking money could fill the gap. It never did. His voice trembled. You looked at her once, and she looked back. Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. Kids notice attention the way plants notice light. You give it, they turn toward you. He stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded as if sealing a promise with himself. Hours passed quietly. Staff cleaned broken glass, whispered about miracles, and left in twos until the restaurant was empty except for them. The fire dimmed to embers, casting more shadow than light. Ethan finally rose, lifting Sophie gently in his arms. He hesitated at the doorway, then turned back. There's something I'd like to ask, he said. Maya straightened. Of course. I've been looking for someone to care for Sophie, not a nanny, not an employee, someone who'll see her. The way you did. Would you consider it? The question hung in the air like soft thunder. Maya blinked, startled. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he whispered. For her, not for me. She looked at the sleeping child, at the faint smile that had returned even in dreams. I don't have experience with rich people, she said. Good, Ethan replied. She doesn't need rich. She needs real. For the first time that night, Maya laughed, a quiet, tired laugh that cracked the heaviness open. Then yes, she said. If she wants me. He smiled. She already does. Outside, dawn began to tease the horizon, thin streaks of silver through retreating clouds. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the first pale light of morning. As they stepped out into the cool air, Maya felt the city reborn. The streets smelled of wet earth and second chances. A taxi drove by, spraying mist across the curb. Somewhere, a newspaper vendor yawned, unaware that the story of the day had already ended quietly in this forgotten corner of downtown. Ethan opened the car door, settled Sophie inside, and then turned back. You should get some rest, he said. I'll have my assistant reach out later. Maya nodded. I'll be here. This place still needs cleaning. He smiled. Somehow, I think you've already cleaned the important parts. The car pulled away slowly. Maya stood under the awning, rain dripping from the edge onto her shoes. She pressed her father's badge between her fingers, felt its familiar weight. The morning light caught the metal, flashing briefly before fading into gray. She exhaled, long and steady, the way he'd taught her. Then she went back inside, wiping tables that didn't need wiping, restoring order not because it was required, but because peace always begins in small, deliberate motions. Hours later, when the restaurant opened again, the world outside had already moved on. But inside, the air carried something new, a kind of reverence that no one could quite name. The same staff who once rolled their eyes at the quiet waitress now watched her with the respect reserved for miracles. And far uptown, in a penthouse warmed by morning light, a little girl sat on the floor with her bear and crayons. She drew 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one in between. Over them she wrote, in bright, uneven letters, My Family. Ethan found the drawing an hour later, pinned to his office wall with a magnet. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need witnesses. That evening, he returned to the ivory room. No entourage, no reservation. Just a father walking into the place where he'd nearly lost everything. Maya was wiping down the same table as before. He set the drawing on the counter. She wanted you to have this, he said. Maya studied it, the colors bleeding together, the 3 figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. In the corner, Sophie had drawn a small badge with wings. That's my dad, she'd said earlier, according to Ethan. He watches us now. Maya smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. He'd like that, she whispered. Ethan looked around the restaurant at the reflections in the glass, the familiar hum of normalcy returning. Funny, he said. I used to think places like this made people feel important. Now I think the important thing is who notices when someone goes missing. She nodded. That's the real luxury. He laughed softly. You're going to be a terrible influence on my accountants. Good, she said. They stood there for a moment, sharing the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Then he reached out his hand, not the handshake of a businessman, but the gesture of someone beginning again. She took it. The world outside glowed with evening sun. Rain puddles sparkled like glass shards catching light. The storm had left its mark on everything, but in a way that made each surface shine a little brighter. And as the camera of memory pulled back, past the city streets, past the gleaming windows, past the lives already moving on, 2 truths lingered. That kindness is stronger than chaos, and that sometimes the smallest observation can rewrite the story of an entire family. Every story has a moment when it exhales. When the storm quiets, the noise fades, and what's left are the questions we were too busy to ask before. What really matters? What did we almost lose while chasing what we thought we needed? For Ethan Ward and Maya Collins, that moment arrived not with fanfare, but with morning light. The city had already moved on. Headlines had flattened the chaos into a paragraph. Billionaire's daughter rescued after restaurant scare. Cameras had found new crises. But inside two quiet homes, the world was still unfolding its lessons. In a downtown apartment above a laundromat, Maya poured coffee into the same chipped mug her father once used. The smell filled the room the way his presence used to. She touched his badge on the counter and smiled. Across the city, sunlight crept through floor-to-ceiling windows in a penthouse that had never felt like home until that day. Sophie sat cross-legged on the carpet, drawing again. Crayons scattered like tiny confessions. Ethan sat beside her, his phone face down for once, his sleeves rolled up, his focus unwavering. She was drawing 3 figures again. Only now the lines were bolder, more confident. When she finished, she held it up. "Do you like it?" she asked. Ethan nodded, throat tight. "I love it." She pointed to the tallest figure. "That's you." Then the smallest. "That's me." And finally, the one in the middle. "That's Maya." A pause. "She helps us see." Ethan swallowed the ache that rose behind his smile. Out of the mouths of children, sometimes the truth arrives fully formed. That afternoon, he called her. Not the billionaire voice, measured and polite, but the human one, still unsure of its strength. "Lunch?" he asked. She hesitated, laughing softly. "At the Ivory Room?" "Somewhere quieter," he said. "Somewhere real." They met at a corner cafe that smelled of rain and roasted beans. No chandeliers, no scripted greetings, just the steady murmur of ordinary life. For a while, they spoke of simple things. Sophie's new obsession with cats, Maya's brother finishing another semester, the weather-threatening rain again. But under the small talk, both knew they were circling something larger. Finally, Ethan said, "I used to think money made me observant, seeing trends, markets, numbers. But I was blind. You saw more in 10 minutes than I have in 10 years. Maya shook her head. "I didn't see more. I just slowed down long enough for the truth to catch up." Silence followed, soft and heavy like snowfall. Then she smiled. "You're seeing now. That's what counts." They left the cafe together, walking without umbrellas. The drizzle misted their faces. Ethan looked up for once, letting it happen. Sophie would have laughed at that, her father finally playing in the rain. Days turned into weeks. Maya accepted the position he offered, not as an employee, but as part of the rhythm of their lives. Mornings began with breakfast at a messy kitchen island instead of conference calls. Afternoons with Sophie painting on the terrace while Maya helped her mix colors, a little blue for calm, a little yellow for hope. Ethan watched them sometimes from the doorway, trying to memorize the sound of contentment. It was quieter than he expected. One evening, months later, the Ivory Room hosted a charity gala, its first since the incident. This time, the focus wasn't luxury, it was legacy. The event raised funds for a new initiative, the Thomas Collins Child Safety Fund, named after Maya's father. Ethan had insisted. When the sign bearing the detective's name was unveiled, Maya felt her knees tremble. She touched the edge of the plaque as if touching her father's hand. "He would have hated the spotlight," she whispered. "But he'd love the purpose." Ethan nodded. "Then we did it right." That night, when the lights dimmed and the last guest left, Maya stood at the restaurant's entrance staring out into the street. The reflection in the glass showed the ghost of her father's badge over her heart. She imagined him there, proud, quiet, smiling the way he used to when she solved one of his puzzles. She thought about the chain of moments that had brought her here. The napkin heart, the missing child, the bear, the rain, the calm. All the tiny pieces of ordinary life that had stitched themselves into something extraordinary. Maybe that was the point all along. Kindness didn't need grand gestures, it just needed attention. Ethan found it later that night when he went to check on her. He stood there for a long time, the words blurring slightly through the heat behind his eyes. He whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for giving her back to me." The next morning, Maya arrived early as always. She found Sophie in the kitchen, making a mess with pancake batter. Ethan sat nearby, pretending to read, but mostly watching. "Morning, chef," Maya said. Sophie grinned, face smudged with flour. "I'm cooking for Button." "Then he's the luckiest." "Bear alive." They laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't echo, it settles. Ethan poured coffee, handed her a cup. "To your father," he said. She raised the mug. "To pay attention." Life didn't become perfect after that. Perfection was never the promise. But the noise changed. The house, once silent except for machines, now carried the sound of crayons scratching, laughter echoing down halls, piano keys stumbling through half-learned songs. And every time Ethan caught himself staring at his phone too long, he'd glance toward Maya, who would simply lift an eyebrow, the silent reminder of a lesson paid for in fear and redeemed in love. Months later, during another rainstorm, they returned to the ivory room together. Sophie insisted. She wanted to show Maya that she wasn't afraid of the rain anymore. They sat at the same table by the window where it all began. Outside, raindrops raced each other down the glass. Inside, candles flickered. Maya looked around, the new staff, the familiar walls, and felt the strange ache of memory stitched to piece. Ethan noticed. "What is it?" he asked. She smiled. "I was just thinking how one ordinary day can change everything." "No," he said. "One ordinary person can." The words landed softly, like closure disguised as a compliment. Later, as they stepped outside, the rain slowed to a mist. Sophie spread her arms, spinning once under the awning. Maya laughed and Ethan joined her. 3 figures under the fading storm, lit by the glow of the restaurant sign. A picture almost too simple to be cinematic, yet somehow perfect. Across the street, a street musician began to play an old tune on a violin. The same melody Maya's father used to hum while driving her to school. She froze, heart tightening, then smiled toward the sky. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "I hear you." Ethan looked at her questioningly. She shook her head, eyes shining. "Just an old song." They walked toward the car, leaving behind footprints that the rain quickly began to erase. But some things, the important things, don't wash away. They settle in memory, permanent and quiet. The world would never know the full story. The news would forget her name. But somewhere between a father, a daughter, and a waitress who noticed, a lesson had taken root. That sometimes the richest act isn't giving money, or orders, or speeches. It's simply noticing what's missing and choosing to care. And in that choice lies everything worth saving. Distraction is the easiest trap in our world. Phones buzzing, deadlines chasing, noise everywhere. But in the middle of all that, the rarest and most powerful gift is attention. Maya's story proves it. Noticing the little things can save more than moments. It can save lives, relationships, even families. So here's the challenge. Look up. Pay attention. The people you love don't need grand gestures. They need your eyes, your ears, your presence. Because the richest thing you can give isn't money or power. It's to make someone feel seen. And that choice could rewrite a story you don't even know is unfolding.